In this video, I'm going to talk about how giving up my smartphone has not only changed my entire relationship with technology, but also really drastically changed so many of these day-to-day workflows and routines. These two items in particular we'll come back to in a bit, because they're significant in terms of how they integrate with my existing EDC philosophy of what items I actually have on me all of the time. These two are now included in that philosophy, so that's going to be interesting to look at. Now, obviously the pencil goes with the notebook here, and that's just one of the kind of new workflows I find myself doing when I don't have access to a smartphone. I'm also going to look at music, how that's different now, and then photography. Obviously, giving up a smartphone, you have to reevaluate what you want from photography, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then gaming. Now, I'm not a gamer, but I have found myself playing these old vintage games on the Nintendo Switch, and that's quite interesting just in terms of the enjoyment you can still have from something that's 20 years old. And of course the iPod falls into that category as well. So what's fascinating about all of this is how old these devices are, and that means they're super affordable, all on the second-hand market. And this is a perfect example of that. And in terms of replacing the iPhone's sort of household computing role, I've picked this up. This is a 12-inch 2017 MacBook, and it was £200 on eBay. Incredible device, and we're going to look at how that has replaced the kind of role of the smartphone in terms of around the house computing. It's actually not only done that, it's replaced the need for me to have an iPad. I almost have no need for the iPad anymore, so it's almost no wonder they have stopped selling that. But yeah, so we're going to get onto all of that. By the way, this is the phone that I replaced the smartphone with. This is Nokia 5210, but I've done another video on how I've set that up in terms of the SIM cards and the numbers, and how I've sort of kept some modern utility in that by making an SMS-based assistant for that from my Mac upstairs, which is always plugged in. So some interesting things in that video. If you're new here, I'm Ben Valak, and I'm a software developer, and I use this channel to sort of use my developer mindset to explore unconventional thinking and optimize day-to-day routines and workflows. And recently I've shifted away from taking sponsorships and freebies on this channel because I want to just talk about the things that really interest me, and I don't want to have to sort of answer to those sponsorships. So now more than ever, your memberships are super important and super appreciated. And since this shift, I've seen so many new members come on board. It's absolutely amazing to see. So thanks ever so much for that. You will get early access to my videos as much as I can, but I'm also working on something that I'm going to offer as a perk to all levels of membership on this channel as well. So I'll be able to talk about that soon. So let's talk a little bit first about this note-taking role. Obviously, when you haven't got a smartphone, there's no easy way that you can just add to your notes. Obviously, the smartphone has this idea that you can add to your cloud sync notes, and they'll obviously come up on your other devices, and there's some utility in that. But I don't think that outweighs the amazing benefit that I've discovered as a result of using pencil and paper for this kind of a thing. So I've got two notebooks now. So I use this little one, which is always in my pocket, and we'll get more onto that in a second. And then there's this bigger one, which is what I have in the office. And in this one, I use this time management system by Mark Forster, and I've done a couple of videos on that now, so do check those out. That's how I know sort of what I should be working on at any moment in time. And the system itself will do all kinds of clever things like overcome procrastination and make sure you're not neglecting older tasks, or it balances the sort of urgent with the older ones. If something's worth doing, it needs to be done, basically. So it shouldn't just constantly be deferred at the favor of urgent tasks. All these kind of different ideas the time management system does. That is much better done in a notebook with a pencil and paper. But also just jotting down notes, going over ideas, expanding on thoughts, and sort of being able to draw arrows and scribble things out. All of those kinds of things are better. And we know that handwriting is better for memory retention than typing. So this is objectively a superior method for note-taking. And, a lot of people sort of justify things like smartphones for e-readers, where you can just quickly annotate and highlight. And actually, all of that does is just create another kind of load of stuff for you to wade through later. It's actually much better, I think, to develop a proper note-taking workflow where you're rewriting phrases by hand. It will go into your mind better. And then you can work with those notes later and move them into a knowledge management system, which is something else I've been experimenting with, the Zettelkasten note system, but that's another video. But I think essentially that, not only does that mean it's no longer necessary to think in terms of using ebooks, because you've got a note-taking system that's so good it will work with a real book, because you're rewriting key quotes and phrases and adding your own ideas to everything you're taking notes on anyway. So I think that was sort of quite an interesting realization. And this small notebook has just been so useful for that I have had to include it in my EDC. Now, I did a video a while ago back called Superhuman EDC, and this was where I looked at this idea that I would carry items that would augment my physical abilities. So I'd have a torch, a knife, a pry bar, and this Zippo, just because those 4 things allow me to do more with my physical attributes than I'm capable of without them. The torch is the flashlight, obviously a good example of that. If you find yourself in a dark space and you can't see because your eyes are inadequate, the torch overcomes that barrier. So that was the philosophy that I used to kind of come up with that collection of 4 items. And since doing that, the notebook and pencil has just so obviously included itself in that idea, because of course it augments my brain, it augments my ability to remember things, and it augments my ability for creative thought. And this is just such an obvious addition to this philosophy, and it's now an indispensable item in my pocket carry. And and in terms of, and this is a sort of interesting side point, that we use smartphones, I think, because they're so rewarding to use and so gratifying, and this is all very deliberate. Actually, there is so much gratification to be had from using these more specialist items. This pencil in particular, the Unikuru Toga, it's a Japanese pencil. It rotates the lead as you write with it, so it sort of self-sharpens and keeps the end of the lead smooth. And just an amazing piece of equipment, and again, so cheap to buy. It was about £7, I think, and really rewarding to use. And because these tools are so pivotal in your workflow, you come to sort of love having them, and there is this rewarding element to this. And I think I don't really miss that from the smartphone. This is rewarding on a much deeper level. So all of that is absolutely fascinating. In terms of EDC, so obviously that is now part of my EDC. So is the watch. I consider this to be in the same category as this augmentation role. This augments, again, my mental abilities to keep time and know the time in other time zones with the world time feature, including taking into account daylight savings times, but also super useful for accurate countdown timers and alarms and all of this stuff. So again, it's on my wrist from when I wake up to when I go to bed. So definitely, again, part of this augmentation philosophy. But then in terms of sort of bag carry, now this is something, I've done a video on this errand runner bag, and I used to have this tool roll pouch in here, along with, the other little bits and bobs. It wasn't really quite big enough to carry sort of like my shake dry raincoat or shopping bags or tissues and hand wipes. It's sort of all a bit tight in there. Now I've got this 12-inch MacBook. I thought I'd rethink this, and I picked this bag up here. And this is just mind-blowing. This was £3.99. It's a lovely little rucksack. It's really small. Incredibly cheap, very inconspicuous. No one's going to know this can have a 12-inch MacBook in it. I can just slip that in there and you wouldn't know it was in there. Again, the tool roll with all the first aid and unexpected items stuff is in there as well. And I've got a wallet in there, of course, a normal wallet, which replaces the Apple Pay stuff. That's, again, from a Lochby item they sent to me. I do like this. I said I was not going to take freebies. This video is not about that. I just happen to enjoy using it. Lochby, interestingly, are the only company who have sent me stuff with no expectation for me to do a video. They've never asked for a video. They're just happy for it to just be appearing here. There was no obligation to do that either. They took that risk themselves. I'm happy for that to fit into my new philosophy. I don't consider that to be taking freebies for videos, but I do really like the gear. So yeah, this is just, I'm using the little rucksack now. I can put my MacBook in it when I'm going away from home, and I know that I'm going to need or have an opportunity to do something more productive with my time than I would do if I just had my phone. So all of that has been very interesting. So obviously now looking at the MacBook in a little bit more detail, if you look at old videos on this, everyone thinks it's wildly underpowered. If you look at the Geekbench scores, it's pretty bad. It is objectively quite low powered. It's an old Intel chip, but it doesn't have a fan either. It's silent to use. That makes it incredibly nice. That makes it as nice to use as the iPads and iPhones. A fan, I think, on a machine that you're using is a horrible thing. It's amazing that doesn't have one. the screen is quite small for a desktop computer, and I actually have the screen scaled as well because I don't want it too close. And this is another advantage of this kind of a device. It's so easy to sit it on your lap and have it at a comfortable viewing distance. Whereas with an iPad, there's no comfortable way of using an iPad on a sofa. You find yourself propping it on your crossed legs, which is no good for your back, or you're holding it, your arms get tired. The laptop just sits on your lap and it doesn't fall over backwards like an iPad with a keyboard. And it's interesting because I'm a keyboard enthusiast, custom keyboard enthusiast. I've obviously done a lot of videos on this, and I actually turned my back on laptops because I thought the superior way of looking at things was a custom keyboard with an iPad. And the reason for that was because I didn't think you could use custom layouts on the built-in keyboards on the laptop. And, you know, even if you could, I was kind of thinking, actually, you're back to a fixed keyboard with a stagger and all of those horrible things. The reality is you can use custom layouts on these using an app called Kanata. So I've got my 30 key layout on here, and it's been absolutely amazing to use it like this. It supports all the things that my custom keyboard layout needs. The combos, the tap holds, all of these things work perfectly on this. So it just means I can use my custom layout on this hardware. I can use the hardware for the way it was intended, just chuck it on my lap and be super productive with it. It's been absolutely brilliant. The battery in this one has no warning about needing to replace. I'm pretty sure it is still the original one, and that in itself is quite rare. If you look on eBay, most of them do have the battery service warning on them. It's possible this wasn't the original battery. I don't know. It lasts ages. I mean, it's, you know, it's exceeded all of my expectations. Basically, I think it's the perfect portable computer. If anything, it could be a bit smaller. I would go smaller, and I would still consider it to be super useful. Obviously, it's limited by the keyboard size, but of course I don't need anything like that full width of that keyboard with my 30 key layout. But yeah, absolutely enjoyable machine to use. Got the Retina display, of course, as well. The glass Force Touch trackpad. It's got all of these kind of hardware elements that we really associate with modern laptops. I think if you were to show someone that didn't really understand what was a modern Mac versus an older one, and say you just bought this and it was Apple's current product, even if they were to use it, I don't think they would have any clue that it wasn't current. It's fine. It is perfectly capable of having multiple tabs open in a browser. It can run Final Cut Pro if you optimize the media first. It's just an amazing machine, and it is ridiculously small. It's just, you know, it's profoundly small. Fantastic. A beautiful piece of hardware as well. I'm really impressed with it for £200, and you compare that with how much you spend on an iPhone, and this is almost 10 years old, and it's probably going to be fine for another 10 years. You know, I think all of this is just about enjoying the older technology. You know, the watch is a good example of this. So this is obviously a brand new one. It was given to me as a gift, in fact, but I've got a Casio that I've had since I was about 15, and it still works. This is technology I kind of consider it like forever technology. It exists, and it will continue to exist for decades. This particular watch is got solar charging, so the battery I think is expected to last about 20 years. So this will literally exist in operation for 20 years without even having a battery replaced, and I think that's just kind of mind-blowing. That's what I want from technology. I don't want something that's going to be arbitrarily made obsolete within a year or two just because the manufacturer wants you to buy the new one. Yeah. Interesting stuff. So photography, let's have a quick mention on that. So obviously smartphone photography, iPhone photography is particularly interesting because they do put some insane computing power into the cameras in iPhones. You don't have to think. You can point the camera and take a shot. It will be the best possible image given the hardware that they've got. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, I think. If you're interested in photography, I think it's a bad thing because it takes away the creativity. If you're not interested in photography, it lets you get a really good picture without thinking. If you're in that camp and you still want to try and experiment with life without a smartphone, I think the action camera is the logical thing to consider. They're fully automatic and they take great pictures and video with no thought. You just push the button, and it's actually a better form factor than a phone. You know, I think holding this delicate glass thing that you could drop over the side of something and, you know, smash on the floor, this is just not a risk with an action camera. You could chuck this off a cliff and it would be fine. You can take it in the sea with you, and it's just amazing. You can get some incredible video and stills. This is the first gen Osmo Action. These things are about 20 quid on eBay. Actually, but using that instead of a phone is because not least because they're so much more affordable and have such a longer lifespan as well. Yeah, it's so much more rewarding to use technology in this way, I think. And if you do enjoy photography and that side of things, and you want to go a little bit further and really go, in my mind, I think in terms of hardware that is far better than a smartphone camera. The Sony ZV-1 that I'm filming on now is an amazing camera. It's about the size of a deck of cards. No trouble fitting in a small bag like that one. But again, you've got this problem that you have to know what you're doing to get the best out of it. Someone who's not into photography is still going to be taking better pictures on an iPhone than someone who isn't into photography would with the ZV-1, and that is just a simple reality of the difference in computing stuff that goes on. The Sony on auto mode is just not good enough, really. I run it on manual mode. I'm interested in photography. I like to learn about technology and photography and all these kinds of things. So for me, it's a little bit different, but it does reinforce that this is something that you want to do because you want to do it. You can't kind of expect it to compete with the smartphone in that respect, but you can kind of do that with these. These are much more obviously designed to be run fully automatic, and the new versions of these, still obviously cheaper than an iPhone, are really amazing. They will compete with the iPhone in terms of image quality. So definitely interesting ways of looking at that, depending on how far you want to go down the photography road. And that, I think, is just the key with all of this. When you're not using a single convergence device, you can choose how far you want to go down each path. Music, really interesting, moving away from subscription services. Obviously, I think the iPhone approach sort of makes you think you just need everything on demand. There's no expandable storage. There's a constant restriction on storage. You have to pay through the nose to get a device with a lot of inbuilt storage. So very much everything is geared towards you just subscribing to a music service. And I've done that over the last few years, and I kind of regret it. So I've dug up my old music collection off a hard drive, and I put it back on this, and I'm listening to music in this room with this speaker set up here. It's just so much more enjoyable to be detached from actually the process. I can't just click next track. If I'm sat over on that chair, the iPod's over here, I can't just skip songs. It's on, and I'm sort of forced to listen to it. So I kind of have to decide if I want to listen to it or not. And I can just have a whole album playing through. And yeah, just a completely different way of thinking about music than if I was just consuming it through an algorithm-based thing where it's always suggesting new stuff and I can always just keep skipping. I think you realize that in your mind, and it takes the charm away from music. But I've also been listening to radio as well. I find radio has been much better for me for music discovery than any of the algorithm services I've used over the last few years. That's been really interesting. The people doing the shows on the radio, they're not just sort of puppets for an algorithm. There's way more to it than that. They're real DJs. They know what they're doing, and the music selection is fascinating. And I've had some incredible music on these radio shows. And then there's sort of like the residency sessions on the BBC Radio 1, where you get really interesting DJs doing their own stuff. And yeah, if you're interested in sort of discovering new music, I think the radio is a great tool. And again, kind of I overlooked that as a result of going down the subscription route. So then obviously gaming, we've got, in the absence of having a phone around, I sort of found myself picking this up. And I thought, actually, as a result of all of this shift in mindset and sort of thinking about longer term life cycles for everything, I thought I'd just revisit some old games from my childhood, which have all been remastered on these platforms. And I really enjoyed Tomb Raider as a kid, and it's been fantastic playing it on that. So I think it's just another example that actually technology can have a really long life cycle. It's just that we're brainwashed into thinking that technology has a short life cycle and should be constantly replaced. And I'm enjoying all of these old items of equipment, and it's just taken a small mindset shift. These are, what is that, 20 years old? Even the Nokia, I'm perfectly happy with this doing what it does now. It's 25 years old. The Mac is 10 years old and still going strong. I know the watch is new, but we know that these kinds of things last decades. This particular one, I think, should last decades without even having a battery change. So I think it's a mindset thing. You don't have to keep buying this new phone every year just because they tell you to. But it's taken me actually giving this phone up to really understand this and then really sort of appreciate the significance of this, and actually just how rewarding and gratifying it is with this approach. I think it's been a really exciting, interesting journey. And of course, it's interesting because on this channel, I've looked many times at this idea of convergence versus counterparts. So I keep coming back to this idea that the counterpart devices for any sort of thing where someone has made a version that does all the things in one device, counterpart devices are better, almost always cheaper, lighter, and superior at doing the individual things that they do compared to any device that tries to do it all. And of course, this is the ultimate manifestation of that discussion. You know, the smartphone is the absolute representation of a convergence device. It does so many things all in one. But each one of those things is quite seriously compromised. And it's not just that it's compromised, it's that it actually includes this whole extra baggage of, you know, the fact that it's a distraction thing, and it gives you all of these algorithms and feeds, and you are the product that they're selling, and your attention is for sale to the highest bidder. And so it's not just that it's not actually very good at doing the things it claims to do, it comes with this extra mental health problem with it as well. And it's been very interesting sort of considering all of these things. So I've done loads of other videos on lots of things I've spoken about in this video, so do check one of those out. I'll link to one of them here, and I'll see you there.